Welcome once again to the Aladino podcast. And here I am, Aladino, and with Patricia. Hello, Patricia.
Hello, how are you?
Doing great. So, are you excited for today's show?
Yes, I am. We have two guests. I know. I'm sorry. Why I'm saying that?
I don't know.
Okay,
We have so many. We have so many that. Are you excited for today's show?
Of course I am. I'm always excited for the show,
Yeah,
for a new podcast.
I know. And today we have a special guest, Stephanie Hardy. You guys gonna hear about Stephanie Hardy. Has a lot of interesting information and something that is good to learn every day. So something that we didn't know before, something new. So that's why you're tuning in and you're listening. And thank you again for listening to the Aladino podcast. Thank you for the very welcome donations. I appreciate it very much. And we are everywhere you listen to your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Red Circle, all the podcasts out there. So please tune in, listen to our podcast, and also you can catch some clips of the video interviews on YouTube, Aladino Podcasts and YouTube. And email us, aladinopodcasts@gmail.com. You want to be part of the show, you want to bring your conversation, you want to bring your opinions, you want to talk, you want to exercise your First Amendment right, we are open doors for you. So, Patricia.
Yes, Aladino.
Tell me about what's going on in New York City.
Oh, it's very hot in New York City. Everybody is melting. Now I wish I had a pool or was living next to the beach. But this is Manhattan, so you do what you have to do.
Here we are welcoming Stephanie Hardy.
Yep.
So we already did a little bit of your introduction. We talked to our audience that we're going to meet somebody who is, first of all, an archivist. That's how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
Archivist. And you work at the University of Virginia.
Southern Virginia University.
Southern Virginia University. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your job. What is exactly your type of job? What do you do at the university?
Okay, I have a couple of roles at the university. The primary one is I'm the library director, but within that, I also work with the archives. And any kind of an institution can have archives. The particular one I work at is an academic at a college, but a lot of businesses keep their own archives. Individuals keep archives of their own family histories. Local history centers have them. So archives are pretty well spread across a lot of different industries.
That's amazing. And then on the archives, what's the biggest treasure that you have archived so far in the university?
Oh my gosh. We've had some fun ones. Probably, I think my favorite one we have is a Bible that was published in 1610. It's a Geneva Bible.
Wow.
And it's in beautiful condition.
That's amazing. And who wrote it? Do you know?
It's called the Geneva Bible. So it was published in Geneva. It was actually published in English. So it predates the King James Version of a Bible.
So if I would like to see the Bible, what would be my steps? Like what would I have to do in order to actually see it? And is it possible for a regular person to walk in and say, okay, I would like to see it. Can I touch it? Or are you not allowed that?
Yeah, and that really depends between institutions. What we do is, yes, we are open for the general public to come in. And most archivists feel this way. The materials there, while a lot of them are old and rare, we want people to be able to see them and experience them and be able to interact with them. So in the case of this, we have certain protocols in place, would ask people to make sure their hands are clean. Mm-hmm. Don't bring your salami sandwich in with you, keep that outside in the never room. But yes, it would be something where you'd call an archives and you'd say, I'm interested in seeing this material. What are your policies? And most of them will say, oh, yes, we have appointment, Tuesday at 2:00. Is that a good time for you to come in? And they're happy to show you things. And like for us, I love to show people things that we have of old records of the school, things, local history that had happened in the area, things like that. So it's a lot of fun. A lot of people think that you go into an archives, you're supposed to wear white gloves to touch everything. And for some things, yes, that's true. But a lot of things like with paper, you don't want to have gloves on because you can't feel the paper and you can't tell if you're how you're turning the pages or how you're tearing it.
Mhm.
So with this particular Bible, one time I had someone come in who was studying religion, and they're like, well, I just want to see how something that happened in the New Testament, how it was written in that Bible compares to the standard King James that they're working in. So it was really fun to sit there with them and go through and read those pieces of scripture and look at it and do that comparison.
And this one, the Bible that King James banned it as a seditious Bible in 1611.
It was considered seditious because, they at that time, and this is what's really interesting about archives. People think that they're dusty and boring. They're really not. People think that history just kind of plods along at this very slow pace, and it doesn't. And it changes so much. So things that were at one time considered, we can't let the general public touch this because they'll know something. This is actually, like you're saying, like with a Bible being seditious and you don't want it printed in English because then the common people could read it, right? It wasn't just the purview of the priests. And that made it very controversial at the time.
But was that written by the Protestants back in the English time?
It was translated by Protestants,
Translated by Protestants. So because of then they wanted to spread out the word. So that's why maybe the king banned it, because he doesn't want the people to wake up and know the word of God, right?
Probably so, yes. I mean, there's a lot there. I'm not as much of a religious scholar, so I could be getting this wrong. So if some of your listeners are great religious scholars, I hope they correct me. But that is very much what I've always heard too, is that they wanted their version of history to come out.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and this still happens today within archives. There'll be materials in an archives that people don't want, whatever group in power with politics, religion, whatever it is, they don't want a certain story to come out. So they don't want people to be able to access things, where archivists and libraries are very much in the business of, we want information to flow very freely. We want everybody to have access to content so that they can study it, make their own decisions. And it is true. Sometimes that doesn't paint your ancestry in the best picture. Sometimes you realize, times were different in 1800 and people thought things differently.
Absolutely. That's why we don't have kings and queens in America anymore.
Right. That's the general idea.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's also not only about the Bible or religious books, but also nowadays we have banned books that just came out, let's say last year or 2 years ago. And so it's the same
concept.
Right, very much the same concept. And I'm so glad you brought up banned books, because I'm a member of the American Library Association.
Mm-hmm.
And the American Library Association tracks how many books are challenged or banned in any given year. And this past year, more books have been challenged in the United States than any other year.
What does it say to you as a librarian? What does it say to you as the United States?
It's terrifying. It's terrifying because, there's I don't know how many books are published in a given year, but, there's books I like to read. There's books that are like, no, that's not my topic. I don't want to read it. But for somebody else, that may be exactly the book they want. And it's maybe the one they need. Maybe it's the one that their children need in order to help them understand their world or who they are. So being able to access those books is extremely important. And if you personally don't like a book, don't read it.
Exactly.
You don't have to read it. You don't have to buy it. You can, as a parent, you can say to your child, I don't think that book's appropriate for you. I don't want you to read it. That's fine. That's great. But I don't think we should be making those decisions for other people's families.
Yes, I agree with that.
Absolutely. Especially in a country that claims that is the land of the free and the brave. Maybe if you are in a different country, that's the rule of the law in the King James times, that no books to read, that's okay for them. But when you are in a different type of country, and you encounter those booking banning, it is kind of very eyebrows raising.
Very much so. And traditionally in history, whenever you see a country that is starting to ban a lot of books, it's usually starting something like Nazi Germany. There was a tremendous amount of book banning that went on in the 1930s, early 1940s in Germany. That didn't turn out so well for them. It was a bad idea. We're seeing it now in Russia. There's a tremendous amount of censorship and banning. That's also not a good thing. So
Nostradamus was persecuted. Nostradamus was persecuted
yes,
for his books and for his readings. And the witches back in time, they also were persecuted because they were reading books. So people who had more knowledge was categorized as a witch because they were wiser people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So then the governments or the rulers or the tyrants back then, they didn't want the regular people to become knowledgeable, smart, because then they will wake up.
Right.
Will find out how the business is going, and then their empire may crumble.
Yeah, and it changes the balance of power. So I think one of the leading tenets of democracy is being able to have an open flow of information. And it has to be transparent. It has to be available to everyone, whether it's government policies or laws or letters that are held in an archive or books that are published and held in a library. That way, I mean, the principle of democracy is basically saying that we trust people to be smart enough to make up their own minds. But they have to have information upon which they can make those decisions. And if they don't have access to the information, they can't make a good decision.
Yes, both sides. Both sides.
Government is afraid because knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So they don't want you to be too smart. That's why probably they are doing the banning books.
Yeah, because imagine the pastor with the chips, you know, imagine the pastor with the chips, and then he moves the chips, go up and down, and then he sends the shepherd, you know, the shepherd with the chips, moving the chips in the mountains. And then he sends the dog, you know, go and move the chips from one side to another side. But then imagine those chips start thinking and reading books, and what are they doing? Oh my goodness!
And you have literate sheep really fast that way.
Yeah, so it keeps spreading out. You know, one sheep keeps spreading out all the information, and then the shepherd started worrying. Oh my goodness, my business is going down. Everybody's moving to another place.
I read a really good article this morning, and I'm trying to remember who wrote it. But his basic premise was that the idea is that you don't want everybody in the room to agree with you. What you want is enough of a free flow of ideas so that you surround yourself by the smartest people, whether it's a president or a business leader or anything like that. You don't want people just to come along and say, oh, yes, you're right. You want people to challenge you and be able to say, do you really think that's a good idea? Do you really want to do that? And so the idea is to have the smartest people, but not necessarily all of the same mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And it's just the basics. In your family, not all your brothers and sisters are the same and think exactly like you. You fight with your brother, you argue with your sister, you pull your hair here and there, but at the end you love each other and you all follow a cause with the family together and then have a better household, you know, a happy household and enjoy trips together and all the stuff. Even they listen different type of music or read different type of books. So why the country and its population cannot do the same?
Yeah, it would be a great idea if we did. And when you mentioned like with families, we have 7 children. And so
congratulations.
big family. Thank you. It's been a wonderful blessing. And so as I've raised those, they all had different taste in music. They liked to do different sports. They had different interests. And I learned so much from them, from their different interests, where music I never would have listened to if they hadn't listened to it first.
Exactly.
And it's been very much of a growing experience for me, but it's been very enriching as well.
So it's the same with the books, actually. People who say, I'm not going to read that book because I'm not interested, but maybe if they gave a try, it will be the same thing. Oh, I will never pick up this kind of book, but then they may be surprised.
Exactly.
So buying books, it's also narrowing our mind, but our point of view, but also, you know, it's like many people think it's not a good idea. So I don't know why the books are banned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the library, right?
Right.
Library should be a school library, maybe more than regular library, public library. But in schools, they ban books, and kids, there are different kids in schools. They're interested in different things. So
and they are. And you know, I would like to think that all children come from homes where they have loving parents that are going to encourage them to be themselves. But that's not always the case. You know, sometimes kids go off in a different direction than their parents. And for them to be able to find themselves in a book and have a character that they relate to is, most studies have shown that's a good thing. It helps validate a child. But it's also the case, like you say, you find another type of book that you're interested in that you didn't realize. My mother, when I grew up, my mother loved to read history and she loved to read mysteries. I like to read history. I only recently have I started reading mysteries, but I like it, but I didn't earlier.
So
and
with me, I wouldn't pick up science fiction books, but now I love them.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
And it's fun, and your life becomes richer and better. And I don't remember who said the quote, but you know, the idea of a great mind is that you can study an idea, you don't have to embrace it.
Yes.
It's like there is a saying that's a great library has something in it to offend everyone.
I like that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, I know you like it. So tell me more about the new wave of library implementation, like remodernization that is happening throughout the country, with Texas, with Oklahoma, with the new modernizing libraries to attract readers and to make them more friendly. Why is that happening, and since when is that happening?
It's always been evolving, and as technology changes, libraries continue to evolve with them. I think it was about 20 years ago, people started saying, oh, with everything going digital now, libraries will just die out. And that hasn't happened. Libraries now are going more to digital content. They're having more streaming services, more up-to-date access. Where I work at a college library, it's been a wonderful blessing because and we live in a very remote area in the western part of Virginia near the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
The west side of Virginia?
We're on the western side of Virginia, yeah.
Okay, the Appalachian Trail?
Right by the Appalachian Trail.
So you can walk to Canada, right?
If I really wanted to walk for 2,000 miles, yes, I could.
Okay, good.
It would be gorgeous. It would be a beautiful hike. Yes. But it's fun because for our students, if we don't have a book, and we're a small school, so if we don't have a book in our library, I can send an email to the University of Virginia or even to Harvard and say, we have a student that'd like to access this article. We don't hold it. And they will send it to an electronic copy of us, or it's in our library loan process. We have these little, make sure all the copyright and all those legalities are met. But then our student can access it usually within a few hours. And so those kinds of technology services that libraries can provide now are fantastic.
Even the ebooks or magazines that people can borrow from the library. Maybe instead of, you can be at home, you don't even have to leave your house in order to get a book. You just order it online, request it online.
Exactly.
And you get ebook and you can read.
And it's available. And it was wonderful during COVID, too. That was a wonderful blessing for a lot of people because you could still receive content. The other thing that a lot of particularly public libraries are involved with in their communities are access to be able to sit down and access the internet for people who, for whatever reason, don't have access to that at home, either because of cost or they're in an area that doesn't have internet access. And that's really, it's a great equalizer for people that, you need to do a job application, but how do you do that if you don't have internet?
Yes.
So libraries are able to provide that service and be able to help people in that way too.
And since you are in that position for 10 years, are you worried that it's going to decade the situation with the library or the books in America, or if there is room for improvement so everybody can read whatever they want and express?
Yeah, there's always room for improvement, right? We can always do better.
Yeah.
In Virginia right now, we are concerned with some of the challenges to a lot of books that we're seeing. And a lot of things from various counties that are trying to not only ban books from schools or challenge them, but also try to prosecute librarians for having those books in their library. I think that's really terrifying.
It is.
It's not a good thing.
It's like hunting for Nostradamus again.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing of saying, I don't think people should eat sugar. Therefore, I'm going to sue a grocery store because they carry candy bars.
Absolutely.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So,
and especially if it's a public funded library.
Right. And most public libraries are publicly funded. And they try very, very sincerely and very hard to provide services and materials for the people in their communities.
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell us more about your job at the university, because I see that you, apart from the librarian, you are an archivist as well, certified archivist. Am I correct?
Yes, it's archivist.
So
Archivists.
When that seed was placed on your head that you say, okay, I'm going to become a certified archivist because I love to collect stuff or to decide, or how somebody becomes an archivist?
Yeah, that was something that kind of came in through the back door for me. I like history. I like understanding not just the dates of when did this battle take place, but what was going on in people's minds. Why did they decide to do what they did? Awesome. And I've always been fascinated by that. So I was working in an entirely different field. I was working as a real estate investor and consultant and real estate broker back in 2008 when everything fell apart and we had a recession. And that was a bad business to be in at the time. Absolutely. Didn't go so well. So I went back to college and I got a master's degree in library science. And while I was studying that, I became more and more interested in the preservation of records and the preservation of history. And archivists, and a lot of what I do is, we've touched a little bit on politics. Archives really need to be outside of politics. We're not trying to decide who's right or who's wrong. And archives is just a place to preserve what happened, preserve the letters, so historians can go in and look at it, and they can write what they want to write about it.
Absolutely.
So part of what I do with archives is the preservation of content, but also helping students, because I am at a college, so helping students research in the archives. And so they have done research on all kinds of things, even from, like most colleges, buildings have changed their purpose over time. So, for example, we have one building on our campus that when it was originally built, it was the gymnasium. It had a swimming pool in it. And as time evolved and that swimming pool deteriorated with age, they've repurposed that building now into being a student center and a student union. So I had a group of students that were working on a business project, and they wanted to show how buildings and businesses can go into a neighborhood and regentrify and upscale buildings. And so we went through and we found old pictures of the building, what it looked like in 1950, things like that, and then see how it had changed over time. And then they were able to use that in their paper and say, this is an example. So a lot of what I do is things like that. It's helping students. Or members, you mentioned members of the community coming in earlier. Our school, we took over from the campus, used to house a girls' preparatory school back in the early 1900s through about the 1980s, when not so many people wanted to go to all-girls school. And then it shifted and came under its current iteration, current direction. So it had a change in 1996 of ownership and mission. But we still have the records from this previous girls' school. And one day I had an elderly gentleman walk in the door and he said, I have this picture of my mother from like 1940. And from the building in the background, I think it was here. But my mother died when I was 16. I don't know anything about her. And so we went down in the archives and we were able to find in the yearbooks and the school newspapers a lot about his mother, that she played on the tennis team, that she liked to hike, like they put in yearbooks, most likely to become, and so he was able to get to know his mother in a way that he had never known her when she was alive.
Wow.
And it was beautiful. And we were all crying. It was beautiful, but it was so neat to be able to connect people with their past and their own personal stories.
So you find that like a sort of double-edged sword, because sometimes you find when you look into your past, sometimes you don't find a very pretty picture of that.
So
So
that happens.
yeah, that happens all the time. So what do you think about that? It's like, oh, sorry, life is.
Yeah, I think the thing with that is to remember, like you do find things about your college, about your family. Sometimes when you look in your own family letters, your country, all these things, we do find things that we look at our past and we're like, that wasn't so great.
Yes.
But two things with that. One is I think you have to own it. You have to say, yes, it happened.
Exactly.
You know, you can't deny it.
Yeah.
You know, in the United States, we can't say there never was slavery. There was slavery.
Yeah, and you
It was
can
not
cry
a good
about
thing.
it. You
Right.
cannot write about it. You have to do something to either, fix it or make sure that never happens again.
Exactly. And by studying it, you can make sure it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it, you can see what led up to it. The other thing, though, that archives do is it can put it in context, and you can realize that the people that might have been involved with that, they lived in a different time. Mm-hmm. This is what they were taught. It doesn't mean they were right, but you have to give them enough space and enough grace for it to say they did the best with what they knew at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
For right or wrong. And so my job isn't really to judge them. It's just to help put it in context and say, this is what was going on in the world at the time.
It depends under which ruler they were living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very much so. And
exactly.
I like to think sometimes, people are going to look at us 100 years from now and say, I can't believe you did this thing. But for us, that was just what an everyday life was. And maybe we don't even think about it.
Yeah, and even 50 years ago, there are many things that America has done, great things that they are very proud, Americans as Americans, very proud of things that they have done, that they have achieved compared to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Very much. And I like to think, too, that we're evolving. I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. You're not the same person you were 20 years ago. We've all changed and we've grown. And countries change and grow, too.
Absolutely.
So I don't want anybody to look at what I did when I was 20 years old and say, well, that's who she was for the rest of her life. That would be terrible.
I know, exactly. And especially when we were having fun, when we were 18 or 19, committing kind of stupid acts,
right.
We shouldn't be blamed today about that. All right, yeah. So we got 2 minutes left. And in the last 2 minutes, we want you to tell us whatever you want to say to the Aladino podcast.
Oh, hey. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate it. It's wonderful. I appreciate the chance to talk about archives. And just remember that when you look at things with our own family, it's wonderful to keep those memories and to keep them alive, for future generations so that, our kids or grandkids or great-grandkids can look back and know who we are.
Yes, absolutely. We thank you very much for being part of the Aladino podcast to bring that information, your life experience, your profession, talking to us, and also things that we didn't know about the archives. And now we know where the Geneva Bible is, so we go and take a peek of it. Although the Geneva Bible copies are on the internet all over if you want to buy a copy. Or
they are. You can probably find it on Google Books. I mean, if you just want to look at it, it's probably on Google Books.
Yeah, but it's better to see it in person. That would be great. So now you know where to go in person and talk to Stephanie D. Hardy. Mrs. Hardy, thank you very much for being on the Aladino podcast. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.